Thank you for joining us. This is Health Your Own Way podcast, and I am your host, Akins. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about conscious parenting, why it's important for your family's well-being. My guest speaker is Dr. Robert Saul. Dr. Saul is a pediatrician and a medical geneticist with over 44 years of experience. And I want to say thank you for being part of this platform. Anything else you want to add in respects to who you are before we start today, sir?
The only other thing I would mention is I have retired at the end of last year, but I'm still very active in pediatric advocacy and parenting issues with the books that we're going to talk about. But then also, I'm the president of the South Carolina chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So I've retired, but I have not withdrawn from my work for children.
Oh, I love that. It's your passion is what I'm getting from you.
Absolutely.
So I know that our topic today's call is considered conscious parenting, why it's important for your family well-being. And before we start defining what it is, how did you get there?
Well, and that's so important to get to where conscious parenting was, because the journey started almost 20 years before that. Okay. I started in practice in 1979 and was very active in doing good medicine and trying to make sure I was doing everything I could. But then in the early 90s, I've said to myself, am I really engaged in the community like I should be? And the answer was no. So I went to hear a talk, and that was 1993. And in that talk, a healthcare futurist by the name of Leland Kaiser said, for anything that happens in your community, 12 words. And these 12 words have been so impactful for me going forward. I am the problem. I am the solution. I am the resource. Which means that anything in the community, if I wanted to be positive and make a difference, I have to take ownership in it. So I am the problem. If I want to be part of the solution, I need to devote my resources to it. So I am the problem. I am the solution. I am the resource. And those words had a profound impact on me, but it took me months to figure out how to translate it into action. And I finally went to folks in the community. I said, put me in, coach. I'm ready. I'm ready to do what I can do. And I was very involved, maybe even smugly so. Thought I was doing such a good job. And then in 1999, two teenagers walked into a classroom in Littleton, Colorado, massacred 13 people and killed themselves. Columbine.
Yes, I was thinking.
And so I asked myself, could that happen in my community? And the answer is yes. Matter of fact, it had happened to a lesser degree. And what have I done to make a difference? And the honest answer was not enough. So then I embarked on this journey that I'm going to tell you about. I wrote an op-ed article for the local newspaper. And then over the course of the next 12 to 13 years, I wrote over 160 articles for the local newspaper about what each of us could do to make a difference. And I articulated the 5 steps to community improvement. And it was doing that led me finally get to this whole conscious parenting thing. But those 5 steps are: learn to be the best parent you could be, get involved, stay involved. That's different than getting involved, I think. The one that's the most intuitive, but seemingly more difficult in today's society, love for others. And that's difficult in our divisive society. And then the one that's the most difficult, I think, forgiveness. So let me just mention those briefly. Learn to be the best parent you could be. Parenting, and as life is a lifelong learning experience. You should always be learning, always figuring out what you've done right, what you can improve, and how you can learn to do that. Learn to be the best parent you could be. Not everyone has the same capabilities. Not everyone has the same circumstances. It's not a level playing field in terms of perhaps education, in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of just the circumstances, your emotional status. Everything is a little different. And so my job as a pediatrician was not to do what I did early in my career, tell people what to do, but my job is to help enable them to be the best parent they can be. And sometimes that meant I had to gently peek behind the curtain and see what was happening, and then provide the best advice that I could given the circumstances, so they could learn to be the best parents they could be. Getting involved is so important because you want to be that positive role model for your children, but also just be a contributor. If you're going to be the problem, the solution, and the resource, you've got to get involved, and staying involved. And circumstances will change, and what you get involved with initially might change. You're not going to be a Cub Scout leader for 20 years, probably. Your engagement is going to change, so you need to change also and stay involved. Again, love for others is so intuitive, but again, it's so difficult seemingly as we start pointing fingers at each other and yell past each other. But the one of those that was the most difficult for me to understand, and this has been a real journey for me, is forgiveness. The whole issue of forgiveness evolves, and it should evolve if we're gonna make a difference.
Okay.
It's, when your 4-year-old whacks your 2-year-old upside the head, and you say to the 4-year-old, "Tell your sister you're sorry," and he said, "I'm sorry," that was an apology. He was asking for forgiveness, but that's different than what you would expect out of a 14-year-old, a 24-year-old, a 44-year-old. That's
Yes.
74-year-old. So hopefully you will learn how to practice forgiveness. And a great little book about that, there's so many different ones, is called Tuesdays with Maury.
Okay.
And it's a book about a professor at a university who was dying from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And one of his prior students, who was a very famous sports writer, found out he was dying and went to visit him every Tuesday. And he found out sort of the life lessons that his professor had learned and was ready to impart to him. And one of them was about forgiveness. Forgive yourself first, forgive others, and do it now. So his message there is you need to sort of forgive yourself first for what you're thinking or what you're not doing, so you can get past that and then forgive others and do it now. So I've tried to learn those lessons over since 1993 about that, but it's been, there's ups and downs, like so many things in life. There's a couple steps forward, one step back. So hopefully we keep marching forward progressively, but understand we're human and we're going to make mistakes. We're going to get over emotional at times, and say things or do things that we will regret, but it's important for us to practice that forgiveness. But in addition to personal forgiveness, I think it's so important to have social forgiveness. And what I mean by that is there's so many things that have occurred that we didn't do specifically, but folks that we're related to did do. And the prime example I'll use here is the American Medical Association. Many years ago, and I don't know when this stopped, they did not allow Black physicians in the AMA.
Okay.
And then they started to do that. Now, it would have been easy at some point just to say, well, I didn't do it, they did it. But the point is, they felt the need as a group to come forward and say, we did this. We need to reset our moral compass going forward. It was easy to say wasn't me, but it is important for us to say was us. And by doing that, we can go forward and try to make a difference in the future for us. So that's that all culminated in my first book called My Children's Children, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine. Because I think we've lost track of one of the most important things that we do with our children is we want to raise them to be good citizens. Good citizens care for each other. Good citizens care about each other. Good citizens want to take care of each other. And I think in our society, it's again with this us versus them that we have, it really gets in the way of what we should be doing for each other.
I understand what you said, and you said a lot, and I appreciate what you said, because I sat here and I reviewed every path of process you've gone through, and it's very enlightening. I think one of the things, based on what you said, my only question would be, is when you're expressing this to certain parents or they're starting off, right? What are some of the challenges they are facing internally or even externally that would prevent them from, taking those steps of being more of a conscious parent that you've seen?
Well, a lot of it is taking a step back.
Okay.
And understanding the social emotional issues of your children and of yourself,
Okay.
and trying to look at the landscape. Let me explain that, because that gets you right into conscious parenting and how, and so there's a little groundwork I need to lay for that.
Okay, go ahead.
When I changed jobs late in my career, I took a leadership course, and it was called Conscious Leadership. And the whole point of conscious leadership is, as a leader, to be consciously aware of where you are. And they talked about a line. And when you're above the line, you were open, you were receptive, you were ready to learn. When you're below the line, you're closed, you're defensive, and you're right. Okay, now we've all been in that 3:00 meeting where we're talking to ourselves. Oh, this is the most boring meeting I have ever been in.
Yes.
When's this going to be over? So if we are conscious of where we are, we're below the line. We're closed,
Okay.
we're defensive, we're right. And we might choose to stay that way until this meeting was over. Or we might say to ourselves, I'm really not where I should be in this meeting. So I need to consciously try to change, be more interactive, be aware of what's happening.
Okay.
So we're going to be above and below this line at times. I think the same thing applies to parenting. And instead of the line, I use the parental awareness threshold.
Okay.
When you're above the parental awareness threshold, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn, you're ready to listen to your children. When you're below the parental awareness threshold, you're closed, you're defensive, you're right, and because I said so.
I've experienced that. That's all I've experienced. Go ahead.
So the whole point of conscious parenting is being consciously aware of where you are and trying to understand the developmental milestones of children. So it's a real journey. I mean, you have to try to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to alter instead of just accept what might have been the parental patterns that you were lived under when you were a child. I mean, one of the things I've learned as being the pediatrician is this is not a 5-minute discussion. I mean, this is a discussion over years with an entrusted professional, because it takes time for people to start to internalize these sorts of things.
But also at the same time, undo some of the stuff that they've learned. If you're raised in a certain environment where, your parents, you didn't talk back to your parents, you didn't really they weren't cautious of how to raise you. They just basically thought you were there to just be quiet. For you to now undo that and think that's not the mentality of how your kids should be to you. It takes time to undo all that is how I see it.
Oh, absolutely. And, and related to that is the whole issue of discipline. Discipline in too many eyes means punishment. Discipline, remember the root word for discipline is disciple, which means to teach. So discipline should be a teaching experience. Discipline should be a learning experience. And absolutely, positively, discipline should not be a physical experience. And the example I use there is, every once in a while, parents will, because I would tell them, please don't do that. Please don't pop your child. Please don't tell me that you're spanking them or whatever. And they go, well, my daddy gave me a good whipping when I was growing up, and it taught me a lesson or two. Well, we do know now there's good evidence that unfortunately children that have been physically punished are much less likely to do the same when they grow older, and much less likely to engage in physical punishment for a variety of folks. The good example for that is smoking. Not everyone that smokes will get cancer, but it certainly increases your risk. Not everyone that was physically punished will turn into a physical punisher themselves, but it certainly increases your risk. And we have evidence of that. So I don't want parents to take that chance. And a lot of the parents that are so into physical punishment were just because that was what they were taught. So you're right. That's my job then as a professional was to try to help break that cycle as best we can.
It's also generational culture. Like, from coming from as a Black, I'm African, and I remember vividly what it was like to be kindly smacked a few times. Um, I know my siblings, especially when she has a niece, I don't see her hitting her. I think she does what you say, conscious and parenting, in the sense that it's the word discipline, right? Like it's a teaching moment. So I see her sitting there and talking to her daughter. When I see that, it's abnormal to me. Like I'm not used to someone sitting, like I don't remember my dad ever sitting down saying, okay, this is not what it should be. It'd be like, don't do that kind of thing. So I understand what you're saying, and it's nice. And you, in respect to when you stated that when you get hit, it doesn't mean that person becomes a hitter. And that's and my sister is a great example of that. I think I'm the opposite. I think I'm the opposite, hence why I'm not having kids, but I think I'm the opposite. So I'm going to stop. But I just want to make that comment that, you are right. I've seen that, and it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and unfortunately, usually not just you're upset with their behavior. It's usually you hit somebody because you're angry.
Yes.
And I think hitting a child when you're angry, again, if children learn from their parents, then if I was hit when my parent was angry, then it must be okay for me to hit my children when I'm angry. And that's a cycle that needs to be broken, if at all possible. Now, when I see that in the office, when I used to see that in the office, where I would see parents popping their child or yelling at their child, I would try gently to start this process because I knew they would quickly tune me out. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. If I just said, don't do that, okay, I had to explain why it's important not to do that. And so conscious parenting sort of just means, and again, that's a journey. Parenting is a journey, learning what the developmental stages of childhood are, and how you can respond in different circumstances. Because remember, every circumstance is different. What you say on Monday to your child to a certain situation might be different than what you do on Wednesday, because your set of circumstances was different. You might not feel good. You might feel better. You might be angry at your spouse or your friend, or all of a sudden there's some crisis in the family because grandmother's ill. There's so many different things that affect every moment of impact that you have to try to respond appropriately in the moment. And then when you don't respond appropriately in the moment, you're willing to take that step back retrospectively, maybe a day, maybe an hour, maybe a day, maybe 2 weeks, and go, that did not go well. And how can I do better going forward?
I think for me, it makes sense. I find that a lot of people don't want to make the effort to make a change on who they are. And I say this, I'm not saying that conscious parenting is not the right path. I just find that people as a general, we're really busy with our life. Everybody's always on the go. Everybody's always triggered. And sometimes, even having the patience to internalize your feelings, to understand and be open to different reactions will be a struggle for a lot of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. And it takes time. And so that's where we as members of our society need to provide that safety net so they can do that without feeling guilty, but see it as a learning experience themselves. And let me give you a personal example, and this was not to pat myself on the back, but it shows what happened. Maybe I even understood this concept years ago. My youngest son is now 31. When he was about 7 or 8, one night he did something that really made me mad, and I yelled at him, and he just melted. I mean, you didn't need to. I mean, he just melted into a puddle. And then my wife got mad at me for yelling. And then we went into that family meltdown mode that most families have been in, where nobody talks and everyone just walks past each other for a couple hours. and so it was finally time to go to bed. And so we did. One of the parents always laid down with him for a while, and I laid down with my son and said, "Son, I'm so sorry. You did something I think was wrong, but my response was totally inappropriate. I should not have yelled. I apologize. I'm sorry. We're in this together." He said, "Dad, would you be quiet?" I said, "Why?" He said, "I hate it when you're nice." So, and again, I think maybe this conscious parenting issue had been brewing in my brain for an extended period of time, but there certainly are times where I have screwed up enough to know that I need to keep working on it. Sometimes at home here now that my wife and I are empty nesters, I'll say something and she says, "Ooh," and I go, "What do you mean?" She said, "That goes against what you write about." And so I go, "You're right, honey. You're right."
I like that.
Sometimes we need those external monitors to keep us on the straight and narrow.
I'm going to be sincerely honest with you right now. Initially, when I was thinking of conscious parenting, I was thinking, it doesn't make sense. Like I'm listening to you, it doesn't make sense. And over the past 10, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, I'm talking to you, it's making more sense to me. And I say this because, at some point, it's not about hitting your kids. It's really more about developing yourself and also teaching your kids to take a step back, review their internal processes, and create different avenues on how to react. And when they see them, because kids replicate what adults do, right? So if you're doing that and you're trying to building better communication skills, if you're doing that, your kids are going out in the world, and if they have any issues or any trauma, not a trauma per se, but any arguments, they're taking a step back and looking at, okay, maybe how they may have contribute to the situation. And then they're building skill sets and life skills that are long-term. That's how I understood. Correct me, Doctor, if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely. And so again, I mentioned to you my initial work said we need to be working on citizenship. My whole point of conscious parenting is raising our children to be good citizens. When my parents divorced when I was young, and I remember my mother just saying, "Oh, Bob, I just want you to be happy." And I'm sure that's the parental guilt of divorce. Well, when my first marriage ended in divorce, I remember myself telling my oldest son, "I just want you to be happy." I realized I got this wrong. Now, I could have just gone out and selfishly done whatever I wanted to quote, be happy. Fortunately for me, my mother set the right examples. And so I followed in her footsteps. And I think we should be thinking of not our children's happiness, but our children as being good citizens. And happiness is a secondary effect.
I agree with you. And I know we mentioned earlier that you wrote books. If anybody was interested in learning more about the conscious parenting, are your books teaching that, as well as maybe what type of platform or website that you have that they can reach out to you and get that more details?
Well, I have a website. It's mychildren'schildren.com.
Okay, we'll have that there too. Go ahead, sir.
And the latter book, Conscious Parenting, does try to build on this. It's a very small, easy read, but it's meant to come back to periodically. That is, this is not a how-to book. There is no such thing as a how-to parenting book.
Everybody's different, yes.
This is a more helpful guide map, if you will, to get into the whole process of parenting, because everything is different for a 3-month-old with colic, for the 18-year-old that's throwing peas on the floor, for the 5-year-old that won't go to school, for the 2-year-old that's having a temper tantrum, for the teenager that says whatever and goes and sulks into the bedroom and wants the keys to the car and you won't give them to it. I mean, I go through examples for each of those going forward. Because I think if we talk about the line, the parental awareness threshold, if you realize, I'm really below the line, I'm defensive, I'm saying I'm the parent because I told you so, and I really don't want to be there. If you need to pause, assess, and choose. Those are hard skills to deal with. To pause, take that deep breath, assess where you to pause, and then assess what's happening. Okay, why am I in this predicament? Why am I yelling at my 4-year-old that he has to eat that broccoli or he's not getting up from the table? I understand this, but is it realistic to expect them to understand it? And so how can I change the narrative here? And then choose. Now, in retrospect, you might have chosen the wrong thing. I mean, you might have chosen, I'm going to dig in my heels and darn it, he's going to eat the broccoli. Or in retrospect, you might say, oh, maybe we'll ease in broccoli over months rather than just, die on this hill right here tonight. I mean, so pause, assess, and choose. And again, you're going to have to make decisions in the moment. And hopefully it's a good one, but it might not be. Then you're going to have to do it and look at it in retrospect. And in retrospect, it's good to have a trusted partner, whether that's your spouse or a significant other, whether that's your sister, your mother, your aunt or uncle. Say, this is what happened the other night. We had a family meltdown. And what do you think? What are your thoughts on this? And so that can having that external monitor can be quite helpful. Plus, hopefully the emotions have settled down to where you can get past all that anger or angst that you have and be willing to listen and learn from the situation.
For me, I have no kids, but when I'm listening to you, I feel like I can take this as a learning experience as well, how in my own relationships, like in your own personal or your family relationships. Like when you said pause and just be that line, the way I see it is it's not only with parenting your kids, but even interacting with your significant other or interacting with anybody else, that you can actually apply this as well in your external life. Basically, that's how I see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as I used to write these op-ed articles, and again, I wrote over 160 op-ed articles over 12, 13 years. I used to let my wife read them before I would send them into the newspaper. And she'd read one and go, oh, I don't know about this one. It sounds a little preachy to me. I go, what do you mean? Yeah, I don't know. I just wouldn't send it in. I said, you don't understand who the target is. And she said, what do you mean? It's me. These are directed for me for action steps. And if they have some benefit to other people, great. But what I've learned so much by putting initially pencil to paper and then fingers to keyboard is I've learned so much about myself. And what I've written doesn't always translate into my behavior, but it's gotten better over the years.
Fair enough. I like that. And before I let you go, I know this conversation has meant a lot to me in respect to the fact, understanding that, maybe how I was raised may not be the only way. And I was raised with a hard hand. So I'm just going to be honest. And I always assumed that, having kids, you kind of need to do that. But you're right. There's a different way of doing it properly. And discipline shouldn't include some kind of physical abuse. I'm sorry, I was going in tangent because I was thinking, before I let you go, anything that you want to add or say in respects to conscious parenting that, the audience would like to know or should know?
Well, again, it's just being consciously aware you are and trying to understand your own emotions are as important as trying to understand your children's emotions. Because we all worry as children get older in teen years and that pushing away that teens do. How do we know when it's healthy or unhealthy? And we know that teens are certainly risk takers, and how we can get them through those, through that conscious awareness is so important.
I appreciate this conversation. As I said, it's allowed me to think and not maybe change my viewpoint in respects to how to relate to kids as you get older, or even if you decide to have kids itself.
And your siblings, how to relate to your siblings.
Yes, my siblings. That's my sibling. Thank you, Dr. Saul.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
We're glad to have you join us. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, share with anyone that needs to be empowered and inspired, and don't forget to join us next week for the next episode of Health Your Own Way podcast. Have a good day, you guys.